B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Wednesday, March 7th, 2018. The primaries for this fall's midterm elections are getting underway. There was a wave of Democratic turnout in Texas yesterday, but the Democratic establishment is working hard to squeeze out progressives and promote the fortunes of people linked to the intelligence community and the military. It's pretty stunning, and a tip of my hat to Carl Howard, listener, subscriber, based in Columbus, Ohio. He scours the web every day, shares a lot of good information on Facebook and at World Socialist's website. He discovered an article, the first of a three-part series, which identifies the number of people who are challenging congressional seats this year. There are 218 Democrats running in 102 districts across the country. And the largest subcategory of Democratic candidates is people with backgrounds with the military, the State Department, the National Security Council, and our intelligence agencies. 25%, 1/4 of all the Democratic challengers in competitive House districts have military intelligence, State Department, or National Security Council backgrounds. That is the largest subcategory, followed by, state and local government officials, 45 compared to 56 in the spook category, 34 lawyers, 30 corporate executives, businessmen, and wealthy individuals. So this is stunning. And I don't know who is doing the recruiting for the DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. But this is really scary because we hear these reports of progressives, and I'll get to a couple of them here in just seconds, who are being the subject of negative campaign messages coming from the DCCC and other powerful Democratic organizations at the state level. And while many of us support Bernie Sanders, the grassroots progressive element of the Democratic Party, those who are part of the establishment, the superdelegates who gave us Hillary in 2016, they believe the future of the Democratic Party is with spies, with soldiers, and with those who support the intelligence community. And this is consistent with the shift that we have seen around Russiagate since 2016. The Democrats champion the CIA, the FBI, all 17 of the intelligence agencies as purveyors of truth and light. This is a really scary shift. And I'll be watching the World Socialist website for additional information. Let's see a couple of the profiles here. Alyssa Slotkin is a former CIA operative with 3 tours in Iraq. She worked as a Iraq director for the National Security Council under Obama, and before that worked for a dark knight named John Negroponte, who was knee-deep in the Iran-Contra affair, and he was the first director of national intelligence. He's a conservative Republican. After her involvement in Iraq, Slotkin moved to the Pentagon, where as a principal deputy assistant secretary of defense for international security affairs, her areas of responsibility included drone warfare, homeland defense, and cyber warfare. Is that the profile that you see representing you in the Democratic Party today? And here is the trifecta. In the 23rd Congressional District in Texas, which is along the U.S.-Mexico border in the Rio Grande, everybody who is running, 2 Democrats and a Republican, have deep ties to the intelligence community. Gina Ortiz-Jones is the apparent favorite of the DCCC. She is an Air Force intelligence officer who served in Iraq, then as an advisor to U.S. interventions in South Sudan and Libya. And then there's a guy named Jay Hewlings, H-U-L-I-N-G-S. His website describes him as a former national security aide on Capitol Hill, federal prosecutor. His father and mother were both career undercover CIA agents. And if you don't want to choose the Democratic spooks, the incumbent Republican Will Hurd is a former CIA agent. Those are the choices that are being presented to many voters in the primary for this year's midterm election. And there are regional differences. This is a little surprising because I would expect the South is where a lot of these national security types would be popular. But the Northeast, 21 of 31 seats targeted by the Democrats have military intelligence candidates. And here in the West, only 7 of the 23 targeted seats feature people with a background in the deep state. Now, one of the higher profile races is a woman named Laura Moser. She's more progressive than her 5 other Democratic opponents. And she was targeted by the DCCC. And they hammered her because I guess her husband is a paid employee on her campaign. And while I find that distasteful, it is extremely common, particularly among Democrats. So Laura Moser beat 5 other Democrats to come in second place and qualify for the May 22nd runoff election. And that is a victory for progressives who did not follow the lead of the DCCC. Also, Beto O'Rourke, who is a congressman from the Houston area, he did very well, had only one opponent in his Senate primary. He's going to challenge Ted Cruz in November. And Cruz already has the knives out. He's running radio commercials, letting people know that Beto O'Rourke's real name is Robert O'Rourke. And he's described as a former punk rocker from El Paso. And he says that he's been called Beto, a family nickname, since childhood. And certainly O'Rourke does not suggest any kind of a Latin or Hispanic surname. But they fear that the name Beto may cause some Latinos to vote for him just on an identity basis, so they're busy trying to rebrand him as Robert. And Vice News makes the claim that Beto is short for Roberto. I have a friend who is called Beto. He is from Brazil, so Portuguese is the mother tongue there, and he's called Beto, but it's short for Alberto. At any rate, also in Texas, there are a couple of Latinas who did well in the primary. State Senator Sylvia Garcia won the primary to replace Representative Jean Green in a liberal district near Houston, and a judge in El Paso, Veronica Escobar, won her primary to succeed Beto O'Rourke. Meanwhile, in the land of Lincoln, the establishment is dirtying up and lying about progressive challengers in the midterm cycle this year. And the bad guy here is Mike Madigan. He is currently the state Democratic Party chairman, and he comes out of the old guard of the Daily Machine in Chicago. He's been funding mailers that for example, take the challenger Marie Newman, who's running against the Democrat in name only, Dan Lipinski, from the south side of Chicago. And they are trying to paint her as a Tea Party Republican. They're also dirtying up other candidates in a similar manner. And this split in the Democratic Party, I think, is going to be a defining moment. And I believe that the pushback from the establishment, those who get their money from corporate executives, corporate interests, they are likely going to prevail in many of these races. And progressives have a major challenge on our hands to try to put some of our own in the pipeline to run for Congress. And this underscores my skepticism that the Democrats will regain control of the House and then be able to move toward impeachment of Trump. They need to win 24 seats. And if they're running spooks and soldiers and ignoring the economic interests of the Democratic base that caused too many of former Democrats to vote for Trump in 2016, this will be another big year of loss for the Democrats unless they change their tune. Senator Kamala Harris is a very attractive freshman from California. She ran virtually unopposed, and because she's never been a legislator, she was the Attorney General of California, she didn't have to define herself on many issues. Now, Kamala Harris has shined in some of these confirmation hearings where she asked tough questions of Republicans and didn't take any bullshit from them. And she has a mixed record when it comes to the mortgage crisis. She is not a supporter of the Crapo bill to help dismantle Dodd-Frank. And those are all points in her favor. She is described as a potential Democratic candidate for president in 2020. But this week, she furthered her definition of her policies, particularly on the international front, by trying to sneak into AIPAC. And she did a conversation with Senator Kamala Harris. It was not listed on the conference's program or website. The only way we know about it is some people who attended it tweeted about it. There is no transcript available. Her own staff says that there is no transcript and that she addressed a group of students, participated in a student-led discussion, and underscored the need for a strong U.S.-Israel partnership, talked about her visit to Israel last year. But this shows that Kamala Harris is just like so many of the other Democrats, falling in line and genuflecting to this foreign group that should register as a foreign agent, like they made Sputnik and RT do. And AIPAC has way too much influence on our leaders. And I'm really sorry to see Kamala Harris not only align with them, but try to hide it from the more progressive wing of the Democratic Party. I find that move reprehensible. In a stunt that is intended to help voters choose Democrats this year, leaders in the Senate unveiled a package to fund infrastructure improvements in the United States by rolling back some of the Trump tax cuts. The idea is to create a contrast. This is what Democrats stand for. You know what Republicans stand for. And while I don't object to the basic idea, it is pure and simply a political stunt. Chuck Schumer knows that he has no hope of getting that passed in the Senate, much less the House. And so it is a gesture. We'll see how it works out. And speaking of stunts, Jeffrey Beauregard Jim Crow Sessions the third or the fourth, whatever he is, he parachuted into Sacramento, our state capital here in California today, following up on yesterday's well-publicized filing of a lawsuit against the Golden State over the sanctuary laws, including one that was passed last year. The Justice Department sued California, the governor, Jerry Brown, the attorney general, Javier Becerra, over the 3 state laws passed in recent months, saying that the laws made it impossible for federal immigration officials to do their jobs, to deport criminals who are born outside the United States, and the Justice Department calls the laws unconstitutional and is asking a court to block them. Now, this is a stunt, pure and simple. It's very clear from the preliminary rulings we've seen from federal courts that the Justice Department cannot cut off funds to California in retaliation for our declarations of sanctuary status. And here's a quote from Sessions, and I won't try a Southern accent. The Department of Justice and the Trump administration are going to fight these unjust, unfair, and unconstitutional policies that have been imposed on you. So Jeff Sessions is appealing to me as a white guy with a sense of victimization, that these liberals have foisted these sanctuary laws on me because I want to support Jeff Sessions and allow him to deport everybody who falls under the purview of ICE. Well, that is highly presumptuous, Mr. Sessions, and you... He predicts, I believe we're going to win. Well, you're going to lose. And I can predict that quite comfortably. Governor Moonbeam called the lawsuit a political stunt. Quote, at a time of unprecedented political turmoil, Jeff Sessions has come to California to further divide and polarize America. Jeff, these political stunts may be the norm in Washington, but they don't work here. And then all caps with 3 exclamation points, he wrote, sad. Gosh, who's he channeling there? Kevin Gostola at Shadowproof has great details on the exposure by the Electronic Frontier Foundation of how members of the Geek Squad, and that's a tech unit associated with the Best Buy retail chain, some of their members have been violating company policy. These are people who work for the Geek Squad at the repair stations that they have set up across the country. And some of them have received $500 to $1,000 for reporting to the FBI when they work on a computer and they find child pornography on it. Now, many people who are just really offended by child pornography may feel that this is a justifiable tactic. But let me point out that even those who traffic in illegal porn have a right, under the Fourth Amendment, to be free of search or seizure without a court order and probable cause. And so even the people at Best Buy, the management, knows that this is a violation. A quote from the company: "We have learned that 4 employees may have received payment after turning over alleged child pornography to the FBI. Any decision to accept payment was in very poor judgment and inconsistent with our training and policies. 3 of these employees are no longer with the company. The 4th has been reprimanded and reassigned." And one of the Geek Squad guys or gals, a person, tried to give back the $500 bounty, and the FBI wouldn't take it back. Maybe that was the person who got to keep their job. While we're on the spy beat, a good story at The Intercept today showing that some of the documents, scripts, and scanning tools that were part of the Vault 7 hack that the shadow brokers picked up from the NSA a couple of years ago, well, these scripts and scanning tools show that spook agencies hack into each other and to their respective hacks. The NSA has been tracking at least 45 different nation-state surveillance operations on the web, and those are known by the acronym APT. And in our great interview with Scott Ritter, we talked about the difference between APT 28 and APT 29. It's a very crucial distinction. So these APTs are monitored by an NSA team called TDI, Territorial Dispute. And get this, the article paints a picture that when the NSA hacks machines in Iran, Russia, China, or elsewhere, its operators want to know if other foreign spies are in the same machines at the same time. Because they could steal the hacking tools that the NSA is using. So yesterday, Scott Ritter told us the details of the Dutch intelligence information based on anonymous sources published in a Dutch newspaper in January, showing that the Dutch hackers had successfully broken into a hacking center in Moscow, and that at one point they allowed the FBI to come in on whatever route the Dutch were using to have a knockdown, drag-out fight with the Russians. And what this shows us is that there is a deep state that connects to other elements around the world, and that they operate off our radar and with impunity. And this raises so many questions about the Dutch report, which I'm having a little trouble swallowing, frankly. The idea that the Russians knew that the Dutch had hacked into their hacking center in Moscow, including the surveillance cameras that showed who was coming and going, and that this continued for months, if not years. And I paused here to let that sink in, because if that's the case, then the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, they're all playing a big game with us about whatever happened in 2016 or in 2015 if you follow the analysis that Scott Ritter gave us yesterday. So if you haven't listened to the in-depth interview, as soon as you get a chance, I encourage you to. I want to thank Hamish from Australia, who checked in, already listened to it, was grateful that we interviewed Scott Ritter. And, of course, Olivier in Switzerland was kind of surprised that Within 24 hours of his request, I was able to get Scott Ritter on and post the podcast. And my friend Ford Green, a lawyer here in California, thanked me for the interview. And I responded by saying, well, the Ritter analysis is based on these Dutch anonymous sources, no public evidence, and it's moving my BS meter into the spy novel territory. What I just mentioned to you, that the Dutch had this long-term pipe into the Moscow hacker nest, and it survived the FBI smackdown in 2015 so they could monitor what happened in 2016? Well, Ford responded, what I love most is Ritter's underlying tone of indignant and offended intelligence and patriotism. As the conversation started to close, Scott's eloquence and yours too intensified and culminated in properly rejecting any place in American democracy for secret government proceedings against citizens. So far, I've listened to it twice, Ford says. It's hard to understand it all and follow all the details, but very worthwhile. And then he mentions Jane Mayer's recent piece in The New Yorker. It's about Christopher Steele. And I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I've already seen a great critique of it from my friend Ray McGovern, published today at consortiumnews.com. And he calls out Jane Mayer and Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks as the latest progressives to jump on the anti-Trump pro-Russiagate bandwagon. And he takes apart Mayer's article, which he finds overly and slavishly praising of Christopher Steele. And he notes, for example, that one of the people who provides a kind of endorsement of Christopher Steele is Richard Dearlove, who was head of the international spy agency in Britain, MI6, from 1999 to 2004. He described Steele as superb, but it was the same man who told Tony Blair that President Bush had decided to attack Iraq for regime change and that, quote, the intelligence and facts are being fixed around the policy. McGovern continues, another character reference that Mayer gives for Steele is former CIA Director John McLaughlin. And with his boss, George Tenet, he did the fixing of intelligence to justify the war in Iraq. And McGovern chides Jane Mayer for including, quote, as flat fact, his claim that the Kremlin and WikiLeaks were working together to release the DNC emails, but provides no evidence. And the Young Turks, they took the report about that Jane Mayer included in her article that the Kremlin intervened to block Trump's initial choice of Mitt Romney as Secretary of State. Now, I never believed that Trump was going to name Mitt Romney Secretary of State. I am puzzled, like many others, that he picked up Rexon Tillerson for the job. And it is possible that we will find confirmation that Russia did signal Trump that Romney was no-go. But where's the evidence? And my friend Cenk ran with the story, even though there doesn't appear to be any evidence available to support it. And I want to recommend a recent article in Rolling Stone by Matt Taibbi entitled The New Blacklist. And he really echoes comments that I've made here. And he takes down the Hamilton 68 dashboard that has been the source of media accounts, mostly false, that Russian bots have been driving American debate over Release the Memo, the Parkland shooting, and many other recent issues. And he does a great job of exposing that Hamilton 68 is really just Bill Kristol and Michael Morell, the would-be Clinton CIA chief. He even takes his own outlet, Rolling Stone, to task for being a part of the Russiagate narrative. And he writes that Russiagate, from the start, was framed as an indictment not just of one potentially traitorous Trump, but all alternative politics in general. He goes on, from Trump to Bernie Sanders to Brexit to Catalonia, voter repudiation of the status quo was the story of 2016. The sense of panic among political elites was palpable. 2 years later, the narrative has completely shifted. By an extraordinary coincidence, virtually all of the anti-system movements and candidates that so terrified the political establishment 2 years ago have since been identified as covert or overt Russian destabilization initiatives, puppeteered from afar by the diabolical anti-Western dictator Vladimir von Putin evil. This is deadly accurate. A little later, he says, forget for a moment what Mueller's investigation might or might not ultimately reveal about Trump. It's been impossible not to notice how effective the Russiagate affair has already been as a hammer against all other political outsiders, even those with opposite values to Trump. In fact, unless you're a Hillary Clinton Democrat, you've probably been portrayed as having been in on it somehow at one time or another. And Matt, you're right. I have certainly heard that from people who don't care for my skepticism about the whole Russiagate narrative. So check out Taibbi's piece. It's well written and right on the money. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And I want to thank Henry Garcica from the Elk Grove suburb of Sacramento. He just renewed his annual subscription and gave me $10 to go buy a drink. Thanks, Henry. This one's for you. Also, I want to thank Bill Goodacre, Tracy Williams, and DGL. They're all monthly subscribers to the Peter B. Collins Podcast. I invite you to join them. Just drop by peterbcollins.com, click on the menu tab, pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber. It takes you to the sign-up page, and in minutes, you can select a level of support that's comfortable for you and your budget. And if you're like Henry, you don't like PayPal, you can communicate using the U.S. Post. My mailing address is Box 150-660, San Rafael, California, 94915. That's Box 150660, San Rafael, zip 94915. The orange imposter in the White House believes that he is the stable genius, right? And so, as I mentioned yesterday, Kim Jong-un of North Korea has spun Donald Trump into circles by announcing that he will suspend nuclear and missile tests while talks continue, and he did it without any preconditions. But that's not good enough for Trump, and today they did not stop an action that was in motion, and they imposed fresh sanctions on North Korea in response to the assassination of Kim Jong-un's half-brother at that airport in Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, that the whole world saw. And it was brazen and grisly. But to imagine that this will make any difference to Kim is just absurd. And the timing of it could not be worse. And maybe this is the substitute for the military strike called a bloody nose that Trump has been so eager to inflict on North Korea. But it's really counterproductive, and the timing could not be worse. Gary Cohn is getting a lot of attention. He resigned from the Trump administration as director of the National Economic Council. It appears to be in response to Trump's determination to go forward with the tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. And I really don't care about Gary Cohn. He's a Democrat. He's a Goldman Sachs guy. He helped engineer the tax cuts for corporations. And, his departure really is pretty meaningless to me. But when we look at the lies that Trump is telling to try to promote his basis for these tariffs, and, of course, the way this is splitting the Republican Party, well, it's fascinating to see what that party cares about. They don't care about his ethics. They don't care about him trampling the Constitution. They don't care about who he spies on. But you put tariffs on imports, you start a trade war, you try to put in some gun regulation, that will divide Republicans. And maybe ultimately, these are the keys to unraveling Trump's support from the Republican establishment, which could, of course, open the door eventually for impeachment. Over the weekend, I traveled to the coast here in Marin County to the little burg of Point Reyes, and at a gallery there was an exhibit by 9 artists from Myanmar, the former Burma. And some of the art was really powerful, including one which was a series of scenes depicting the Nobel Prize-winning current leader of everything but the military in Myanmar, and that is Aung San Suu Kyi. And she is presiding over what we thought was ethnic cleansing, but is clearly moving into acts of genocide. And the treatment of the Rohingya, the forced expulsion from Rakhine State, they're holing up in Bangladesh in these very difficult refugee camps. Well, this is being augmented by systematic campaigns of terror and forced starvation. And one of the people who is commenting on this is from the UN Human Rights Council. His name is Gilmore. And he said that the nature of the violence has changed from the frenzied bloodletting and mass rape of last year to a lower-intensity campaign of terror and forced starvation that seems to be designed to drive the remaining Rohingya from their homes and into Bangladesh. And the government of Myanmar is busy telling the world that it is ready to receive Rohingya returnees, while at the same time its forces are continuing to drive them into Bangladesh. And here in the United States, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum has made the remarkable decision to withdraw and revoke a human rights award that it gave to Aung San Suu Kyi. The award was named after Elie Wiesel, who is the only other human who has received it. And I think this is the right move. They should also take back her Nobel Peace Prize, right behind Obama's. The story from that's leaking out of the Mueller campaign is adding some detail to a secret meeting that Eric Prince, the Blackwater guy, the brother of Betsy DeVos, that he attended in January of 2017, just before the inauguration, in the islands called the Seychelles. And the link is a guy named George Nader, who is a Lebanese-American businessman who advises the Crown Prince of the United Arab Emirates, and his meetings are being scrutinized, including the day that he was picked up by the FBI, January 17th of this year. He landed at Dulles International Airport, and he was planning to change planes to head to Florida, to Mar-a-Lago, to be part of the Trump first-year anniversary celebration, which, of course, was it occurred without Trump because the government had been shut down the night before. So this is a thread we'll be watching, and it is intriguing to see if it might lead somewhere further interesting. And finally today, I want to recommend a piece by Lee Camp. He's a very funny man. I don't know if you've seen his TV show on RT. It's called Redacted Tonight. And he wrote a piece at Truthdig this week, which talks about how the Democrats who fancy themselves as the resistance are busy giving Trump power. And he enumerates 6 different ways: by giving Trump unlimited war powers, unlimited trade negotiation powers, unlimited surveillance powers, the power to lock someone up indefinitely without trial or charge, the power to assassinate American citizens without a trial or charges, and full control of our election system infrastructure. It's an amusing piece with a very serious message. Click on the link in the show file for today's podcast, and you can peruse it at your leisure. Thanks for listening to this podcast. We put it up on YouTube. When you visit there, click on the subscribe button. No money involved. And thanks for listening. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.